Welcome to the Copilot Show, where I interview Microsoft staff innovating with AI. I hope you will find this podcast educational and inspire you to do more with this great technology. Now, let's get on with the show. In this episode, we're going to focus on fast track and the distinction between the copilots, because there are so many of them these days. We might touch on a few things like PCF controls and even contact center as a service. But today's guest is from Miami, Florida in the United States. He works at Microsoft as a fast track senior solution architect. He's been an MVP, so he's one of those ones that went blue badge, joined the mothership, as we say. He's a Microsoft MVP and creator of a leading blog on the Microsoft Power Platform with over 1 million visitors a year. In his spare time, he loves taking photography. He actually has a whole dedicated site to his photography, which we'll discuss as well. Assembling amateur videos and spending time in the kitchen perfecting new recipes. You can find links to his bio and socials in the show notes for this episode. Welcome to the show, Carl.
Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for having me here.
Good to have you on the show. I just find you, as I discussed off air, so intriguing, so many of the concepts that I believe you're ahead of your time with, particularly around how you present yourself online. Before we get started, food, family, and fun, what do they mean to you?
Those are one of my three favorite topics, really. So food, I'm a big foodie, actually. My wife and I, every weekend, we make it a habit to go to a new restaurant somewhere, and we'll drive or fly as far as we need to try different food. We take our foodie experiences very seriously. That's a topic that I love. Family was the other one I think you mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a 4-year-old toddler, so he takes up all my time. It's just amazing that I actually have any capacity to do anything after I interact with him. But he does energize me as well. And fun, you said, right? Really, travel that's probably my biggest passion. I try to do several trips a year if I can.
Nice.
That is not work related, and kind of lucky because where we live in the world is close to a lot of countries, right? So we get to have a lot of opportunities. Yeah, so that's those three.
That's epic. Interesting what you said about travel. Travel, it's not work related. So for years, I've always had a career that's involved a lot of travel all over the world. It takes me, I just booked flights yesterday. Well, when I say my wife booked my flights yesterday to go to Vancouver in March next year, and then drive down probably with Carl Cookie in the UK, drive down from the Power Platform Summit in Vancouver to the MVP Summit then in Redmond. And we worked out a long time ago that to mix work and pleasure on travel, it doesn't really mix. And fundamentally, your mindset is in two different spaces. And so she used to go, I want to go to MVP Summit. Well, you're at MVP Summit. She came once and said, I'll never do that again. Like,
Right.
that was not for me, right? And so I go to conferences and stuff. She doesn't come. But we've worked out when we travel, we want to travel and we don't want to think about work. We want to really enjoy that. And I noticed in your portfolio, your photography, that you've been to Mostar. And
yes,
we've been to Mostar. What were your thoughts of the place?
It was beautiful, We were actually in Croatia, in Dubrovnik, on that trip.
Same?
Yeah, okay, right. So we did a little day trip.
Nice.
The border, went down to Mostar, and fascinating place. A lot of stuff has happened in that place, let's say, right? So you kind of feel that when you're walking around. We were there maybe it was probably like 12 years ago, I'm going to say, okay? But we loved it, and every time I go to a country, I feel like I need to see more of it. And, and I know like Sarajevo, for example, the capital has a lot to see apparently as well. I feel like I scratched the surface with Mostar, but I really loved it. It's probably, I think from what I've heard, it's one of the most beautiful cities in that country,
Yeah. And of course, the bridge is absolutely famous in the center of that. We stayed for a month in Croatia, in Dubrovnik, and then we did day trips, in there. We went down to Montenegro and, and various day trips, which were all done by the Airbnb, our host at the Airbnb. He would then hire himself out as a tour guide for a day at a time. And so it was just amazing.
Fantastic.
Before we jump into the topics we're discussing, your role in Microsoft, one of the things that has impressed me with your body of work over your career is that it's documented. And one concept that's been gnawing at me for the last 12 months and that I want to create some content around to help people is the concept of a portfolio website. And a portfolio website being more than just a blog where you know, are going to write on some piece of tech, you know, whether that be AI, Copilot, Power Platform, Dynamics 365, M365, or Azure, you know. It's more about what I liked when I saw your website. It has an historic timeline to it. It shows your journey of learning. It shows your kind of like your certification, how your career changed. All that is just documented there. And then I assume it wasn't necessarily a retrospective documentation. It was as it's happened, you've continued to build out this portfolio. And just this last week, I was with the country provider for New Zealand for the .nz domain space. And I was in a consultation process with them around changes to the constitution for the country, etc., in that space. And one of the things that came out is that there is an uptick that they're noticing in people buying domain names where that had died for quite a bit with social media because everyone's like, no, I just do social media and that's how I get my audience and stuff. And of course, you don't own that. Somebody else owns it. It's on their platform. You abide by their rules. If they're giving it to you, you're free. You're the product. They're selling you. They're selling your data, that type of thing, right? And so there's been the swing that they've noticed from the domain names, types, etc., that have been purchased is people going back to, hey, I need my digital place in the world that I own that has not got advertising all over it. It's not, the data's not been sold, but it is my digital footprint online that I want, you know, if people are researching me or wanting to engage with me, they know about. And I loved on your website, whether it be a certification, whether it's upcoming speaking engagements, past speaking engagements, code, feedback, it's all there. You get this smorgasbord, and I'm actually going to do a presentation on Friday this week, and I'm going to use you as an example. What was your thinking behind it?
You know, it kind of evolved over time, I guess. The reason I created the website initially was I was building something, I think it was in Azure or something like that. Maybe it was Dynamics related. And there was no steps online that went through the process. And I thought, you know what, let me capture this. And there's probably someone out there that is going through the same thing, right? And then it kind of evolved more to where when I would run into problems, you know, I'd spend like days figuring out something that wouldn't work, right? And then suddenly I'd get the answer. And I'd say, okay, I'm going to post this out there because there's at least one person that's having the same problem, right? Mm-hmm. And then it just kind of built from there. And it's funny because when you start and you see the traffic coming in, you're kind of like preaching to about 100 people in the entire world, right? And then the numbers go up and you say, okay, like, yes, there's a lot of people out there that are going through the same thing that I am, right? And then when you start to build as a portfolio, I think, you know, very naturally it happens because you'll do something like speaking and you'll say, okay, well, I want to share that, right? A lot of this is really naturally about sharing information, sharing about yourself as well. That's an interesting one because not everyone's very open about sharing and some people are oversharers, right? And somewhere in the middle. And so that's kind of how the site evolved to where it is today. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I feel like I know you by being there, right? And then going over to your YouTube channel and seeing your videos there. And I love it. Very holistic. And obviously you got a lot of traffic. What made you go Blue Badge?
I'd been wanting to do it for a while. It's funny because so when I at university, in my final year of my degree, we had to do an industry project somewhere. And they basically put everyone's name into a hat and they said, okay, who's going to, and they just named like a company, right? And they just started pulling people out. Okay, these 4 people are going to this company. Then they said, okay, Microsoft, let's see who's going to Microsoft. And they pulled out my name. So I was one of the people, right? One of the 4, right? So I did this project at university where I was working with Microsoft Research for a year. We weren't there every day. We'd just go in every now and then.
Yeah.
But that was sort of, you know, my career almost started that way, if you think about it, you know. And then I went into the Dynamics world. So Great Plains Software. And that was before Microsoft bought Great Plains, but they had such a tight relationship that it was no surprise to anyone. And then over the years, I just worked with so many different Microsoft technologies in different capacities. So It felt pretty natural at some point. It was always in the back of my mind, like I'd love to work for this company properly. There's a lot that I could contribute, I thought. And so I just, got an opportunity recently and I had to take it, basically.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I always say, and the outcome is, in hindsight, yes. Would you still take the same opportunity how many months in are you now?
Nearly 6.
Okay, so 6 months in.
Yep.
If you were faced today with taking the job, would you take it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Awesome. I think always a 3-month test is even when you hire staff, I always go in 3 months after hiring someone, would I still hire them? Now I know what I know.
Right.
And the key thing is, of course, if the answer is no, you need to get rid of them as quick as possible.
Yeah.
Because, I always say a problem never gets better with time. It only gets worse.
Yeah.
Tell me about Fast Track. When you talk about Fast Track, what's top of mind for you?
So Fast Track's an interesting one because the name doesn't almost reflect what we do. I like to think of us more as like product advisory group, something like that, So we're really advising customers and partners like how to ensure their implementations go smoothly.
Yeah.
That's kind of the key. And there could be many different ways to make that happen, but our job is to make that happen.
I like it. And do you focus only on Power or on Dynamics?
So yes, my team that I'm on, we are we're the customer service Dynamics 365 team. Customer service and field service. Yeah, both of those. Yeah.
And so is this how the contact center as a service comes into the mix as well?
It does, right, exactly. Yep. That's our team. Yeah.
Gotcha. So tell me, let's just touch on that for a second because I'm saving the good stuff for last, which is I want to get into the Copilot stories. Now, contact center as a service is 2024's flavor of last year's DCCP story. And I could go back 17 years of iterations because I have a slide because I've done a lot of work in pre-sales in this space. And going right back to, there was a customer framework way back in the day. CCA was another, there was an accelerator. Right. And there's this whole timeline, back in the day, this concept of single sign-on, unified interface for contact center staff. And doesn't matter if you're in, whatever the legacy systems, you've got everything at your fingertips. If you're in 5 different, you work for an insurer that has 5 different product lines that have come about because of acquisitions and you've kept all those bits of software, not a problem, right? Single interface. Yep. Now, the contact center as a service, I find it interesting that the doubling down is happening this year because I felt that DCCP came out and then Copilot kicked its ass, and it became, everything went to AI kind of story. Yet, of course, the whole contact center as a service has a massive AI component to it in providing, much better customer experience. And about a year and a half ago, I talked to the team in Israel that must have been 2 years ago. They had 14 different AIs running in the contact center. That was all pre-generative AI. So whether it was sentiment analysis, whether it was, did somebody use a word in the conversation just now that was from another language, and that was a nuance. They're bilingual and they switched context slightly. Sure, a whole range of things, and of course, transcripting in real time, searching for knowledge base articles, etc. Tell us about how do you pitch or how do you talk to customers in this world of content center as a service?
Let's take a quick break.
Are you ready to transform your career in just 90 days? Join me on the 90-Day Mentoring Challenge and unlock your full potential. As I listen to the podcast, enroll now and get 10% off using the code MBAP. That's MBAP at the checkout. Don't miss this opportunity to learn from industry leaders and accelerate your growth. Visit ako.nz365guy.com and start your journey today.
So I think the key thing here really is to understand how we got to CCaaS and what it means, right? So you mentioned the digital contact center as a platform, right? DCCP. And that's really Microsoft doing everything when it comes to a contact center. Yeah. So it basically means so Microsoft has all these different channels that can be supported, right? So whether you're talking about chat channels, voice, social, email, SMS, that sort of thing, right? All these different ways a customer can reach your organization, right? So that's the first part. Then you go into the next level down, which is self-service. Having an issue that a customer has being able to be resolved before you get to speak to an agent, right? So there's tools all around
deflection?
that. Yeah, basically, right, exactly, yep. And then you go into the routing that happens to make sure that conversation gets to the right agent so that they're able to resolve the issue quickly, okay? So there's intelligence around that. That's part of the digital contact center platform as well. Then you get into the agent experience. So, and you mentioned Copilot, so being able to resolve issues very quickly using Gen AI. Also being able to just have like a 360-degree view of the customer information. And you mentioned some other things earlier, right, about summarization and sentiment and things like that. And then the supervisor experience. So being able to look at all of this, right? So that's kind of the digital contact center platform. What Microsoft did is, if you think about customer service workspace and Microsoft had all these things tightly coupled together. Okay, so that was kind of customer service. When you think of, if a customer installed Omnichannel, for example, they would be able to set up a voice channel and a chat channel, and it would all work very well together on the Microsoft platform. The differentiator now with CCaaS, Contact Center as a Service, is Microsoft is basically saying, you know what, you don't need to do all of those things that I just mentioned. What you can do is like, if you like conversational IVR, for example, why don't you just go ahead and use that? We'll give you that little piece of our platform, and you can plug it into the platform that you already use. So if you're using Salesforce and you're using some other third-party voice channel, then you can keep all of that. You could just take a little piece of ours, like the IVR. Or you could, for example, use Copilot, our Copilot, and embed that in Salesforce and just have the agents use it that way, right?
Yeah.
So it's all about it's just taking these pieces. So Microsoft decoupled what was one platform. They split into these different components, and they've allowed an organization to, Microsoft phrases it as meeting the customer where they are at now.
Yep. Okay. That's interesting, because it's kind of like, let's make a platform all in, and then now let's break it into its parts and take what you want, eat. So here's a smorgasbord, but you put on your plate what you want. Interesting. I hear a couple of things, and if you're not knowledgeable about these, no problem, as in if it's not your... So, Nuance was purchased about 2 years ago, and Nuance was, my understanding, or how I look as an external person looking at it, it was purchased because they had some great IP in the medical space. They also had Dragon Naturally Speak from Zero Dot back in the 80s, right, which was this whole concept of using voice to type and that type of thing, which of course then became a patient note taker. When I was demoing it just after the acquisition, I was demoing things like, hey, listen, we'll call in and we'll do our biometrics on the voice. That'll, that's a 2-minute process in a standard contact center scenario. We can wipe that out to sub 30 seconds. My understanding, that's been deprioritized now from Microsoft. And because in the world of AI, it is getting so good to even get around biometric voice prints that the confidence level is not such that you'd want to put your reputation on it anymore. And I find it very interesting. I've done over 600 podcasts, 7 years. My voice print is 100% out there, right? And anybody could sample as much or as little of that, and I reckon really you would be convinced that whatever was being said was me. And of course, from a cyber crime perspective, that's a particular vector that they could choose to exploit. Are you seeing more, and I'm going to go back to the Nuance, more of the Nuance acquisition come into the tool set, or is Nuance not even part of the mix anymore, as in nobody's talking about it? It's fully been ingested into the Microsoft machine.
So it kind of both, right? So it has been ingested. So when you think about biometric authentication, right? So Nuance has a commercial, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a guy that calls his bank, and the bank says, can you tell me your third grade math teacher's name, right? It's an authentication mechanism. And he has no idea. He can't remember it, right? And there's another guy walking in the background, and he says the words, my voice is my authentication. And then Nuance is in the background, and Nuance recognizes that phrase, recognizes this person,
Yes.
and authenticates him just through that expression, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a bit of an arms race, right? Trying to stay one technology, trying to stay ahead of the other, right?
100%.
And it's hard to say, like, at any given point in time, who's the winner. But
Yeah.
you would hope that it's the server, the companies that are winning that race. But ultimately, like, a voice is like a fingerprint, right? But yeah, to your point, can you introduce fraud that way? It depends on the strength of the algorithm, let's say, right? So yeah, but Microsoft's taken these technologies from Nuance, they've baked that into the Power Platform. Biometric authentication is something that is in preview now. I think next year it's coming out as a general availability. But Nuance had so many great features. One of my friends works in radiology, and he was telling me all about the medical history as well.
Yeah.
It's really very interesting. The company's been around for so long, right?
Yeah.
Like, you mentioned the 80s and
Yeah, the stuff, right, that, like, I didn't realize till well after acquisition that Dragon Naturally Speak, which was, quite popular back in the day for anybody that tried to use voice as a way of writing, right?
Right. Yep.
And that was part of the IP of that organization. And of course, from a medical perspective, and they've got, I forget the name of the medical product we were looking at for an Australian customer that we had just put on the industry cloud for healthcare.
Okay.
And this whole concept of a doctor being able to take medical notes using voice, but of course it has to have a lens that understands the drug names that have been mentioned and what that's referring to, and being able to very articulate, write a compliant medical note. And at that time, the tech wasn't even available in the Southern Hemisphere. Microsoft owned it, and they're just trying to bed it down in the Northern Hemisphere, but it hadn't been available in the geo yet. When you talk about the whole biometrics thing, I find it very interesting. I feel like we've gone back to the virus scanning days where you needed your virus update each night. And of course, we forget about it nowadays because it's just built into the operating system. But back in those days, right, there was a cat and mouse game all the time through a virus or malware being released and then your software being updated to identify it, intercept it. And I feel that in the world of AI we're going into, there's going to be this whole model of, is what I'm seeing and hearing, I don't think that humans are going to be able to detect that within probably 18 months. And so you're going to need software to be able to go, is that video I'm watching really that person talking? Or is that voice that I'm hearing really that person? And I think it'll be a cat and mouse game, right? It'll be a 24-hour update cycle of whether deep fake has been, your detection deep fake software, which will also be AI enabled, right, is going to be that cat and mouse. Maybe a whole new industry will come about. I found it interesting at the recent Power Platform conference in Vegas, of a Locknote in the last day was a gentleman talking, or was a panel actually, and that cybercrime is the third largest country in the world based on GDP.
Right, yes.
So only two in front of it, right? There's only the US, followed by China, followed by cybercrime if it was a country, the GDP. And so I think there's a lot of people don't realize just actually how much money it goes on. And I've seen, big ransomware attacks that have felled big companies. And I think that a lot of people are oblivious to the level of activity that is going on in the space. I want to switch gears and talk quickly about PCF controls, because you've done a lot in this.
Mm-hmm, sure.
What's your ideas around it? What are your thoughts?
So I gave a presentation on this actually at the Power Platform Community Conference this year, and it went very well. We had 150 people in the room roughly. I think, there's a lot of interest in PCF controls.
Yeah.
And, they've been around for some years now. So they're very developer focused, right? It's not really something that a low code person would build unless they really had an inclination to want to start coding.
But they use them, right? If a developer could build them and put them into a library, that they could then be used by.
That's true. Yes, exactly. Right. Yeah. So, there's definitely the two perspectives, right? The building and then the consumption. If you were a decision maker, you would need to make the decision of like, okay, do I need a PCF controlled here? Should I use one or not?
Yeah.
And from a dev perspective, it's kind of interesting because there's a little learning curve. Previously we had web resources that would do some of the job of PCF controls, not by no means all, but they would do some of the job, and it was a lot easier for a developer to just build those.
Yeah.
You just needed to know some HTML and you could build a web resource. But these days, PCF controls, steeper learning curve, but they have great capabilities. So you can, There's a community website out there, pcf.gallery, that was built by a guy called Guido. And there's hundreds of controls out there, new control being published every other day. So there's buzz around PCF controls. But I think, the barrier to entry a little bit steeper than the web resources. Yeah.
Should web resources be used at all nowadays in the context of now having PCF controls?
I think you want to really start to go with the mentality of PCF control first. One day Microsoft might decide, okay, we're flipping that switch, no more web resources, right? So you want to kind of future-proof yourself that way.
Yeah.
And I think as a developer, I would really encourage people to learn how to use them and build them because they have a lot of capabilities. You can use React, for example, and Node.js to use third-party libraries to make them really, really rich. And then when you're building these controls, you can use Fluent UI to make them look exactly like the native Dynamics forms and fields. So, that's kind of like instantly like a kind of a nice feature, right? To be able to look at a page. And I remember actually I went to your session in Vancouver where you showed a Power App that was built that was beautiful, right? And that's something and I think part of your message there was that that's not really prioritized enough when people build apps, right? And PCF controls can get you on that journey, right?
100%, right?
Yeah, when you look at Dynamics form where you have fields on there that just don't belong there,
it's jarring.
The user experience, and these people log into that every single day. Users log in every single day, right? If you're a salesperson or finance person or a customer service rep, and you see these misaligned fields and things, it's the experience is horrible, right? So why not make it as good as you can?
Yeah.
It's part of the message.
100% in agreement, and why it is so important. And I came across a guy in the UK that has started a company. When I say started, been going, I don't know, maybe 5 years now. And all he's done is dedicate himself to PCF.
Right.
And he's becoming the Telerik of PCF because, you talked about the gallery. The challenge with the gallery is that it's great to see the concept, right? Give an idea. But if you're going to put a PCF, you're not going to put a PCF control from the gallery in a bank, right? Because there's a whole bunch of regression testing, all the kind of stuff that has to happen to go, who's going to maintain this code, blah, 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 blah. But what this company is doing is actually building maintainable PCF controls. And, I always thought back in the day of web design, Telerik was just a game changer, right? And what you could do. And you needed a calendar control that was in keeping, that did, a certain, a month view, week view, timeline view. And it just was there, right?
Yeah,
it represented data differently. And I just think that when PCF controls were first introduced, and I'm thinking maybe 2017, 2016, 2017, 2018, I know there was a bit of turmoil around bedding it down to start with, right? And then it's taken off. But I just think there's such a far-reaching, I'm surprised more businesses haven't spun out that just focus on doing these things at scale.
Yeah.
And I know there's not really a marketplace and stuff for it, and there's a whole, how do you work it? You do a license per user, per org, that type of thing. I mean, there's challenges without a doubt. But I just think that so many times we build software without thinking. I asked you about 6 months later, would you stay on the job? 6 months later, if someone's using a software that you've built, whether it's on Dynamics Power Platform, whatever it is, are they still saying, God bless you to the developer, or are they saying, curse this person because the way you've laid this out is just not the way we work, or you put a compulsory field that I have to scroll 3 page lengths down the form rather than putting that right up the top where if I have to do it, to do this functionality, it's going to take 10 clicks where it could have been done in 1. And it's kind of like so many times that I've noticed on projects, developers do things to tick a box. It was required. We've done what was required. But did you do it in such a way that people don't have to think about it? It's so immersive. That's a different story, right?
Very different.
And it's definitely a focus area.
Yeah.
The final thing, and I know we're over time, that I want to discuss with you is the distinction between copilots and how do you talk about them? Because I see it in 3 broad categories. And the minute I said 3, a 4th one popped to my mind, right? But I see M365 Copilot, right, is prevalent across Teams, the web browser, SharePoint, etc. Then you've got your Copilot Studio, which of course allows you to create your custom copilots, which, I'm not a big fan of custom UIs. I'd like all the UI still to be in Copilot. So you're creating a consistent user experience for them, but allows you to tailor what goes in there. And then, of course, we've got AI Studio, Azure AI Studio, which allows for you to do the heavy lifting and build some very complex things. I still feel I'd like the UI for it to still be Copilot, just for consistency and making it ease of use on that end audience. How do you tell, and why the fourth category was then you've got your embedded, right? You've got your Dynamics 365 Copilot in sales, you've got Copilot in finance, blah, 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 blah. And I'm not even touching on things like GitHub Copilots and things like that, or security Copilots, because they're another vector, right?
Right.
But just on the surface, how do you explain it to people? How do you, remove that confusion for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, luckily I don't get that question a lot. It's almost like this. I think you need to focus on the particular topic of where the Copilot is used, right? Because it's like what you said, there's something like 80 different Copilots out there, maybe more. I don't know.
I've heard over 100. So,
yeah, right. There was 80 like 2 days ago. Now there's 150, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
We added 70 in 2 days.
Yeah,
that's kind of how things are going, right?
Yeah. Well, Microsoft's an AI company, plain and simple nowadays.
That's right. Copilot company. Yep. And so it really comes down to like, what's the use case? What's the business case, right? And then that's when you say, okay, this is the Copilot that is applicable to what you need to do, right? For example, like even in customer service, the message is very tricky because we have Copilot in service where it sits inside of Dynamics 365, where agents use that Copilot to help resolve cases. Then you have Copilot for service, which is the same thing, but it's sitting in Salesforce or ServiceNow or Zendesk, okay, or any other system.
Yes.
Then you have Copilots that sit on a company website that faces the public, right? A customer logs into their bank and they say, hey, what's my account balance, right? Yeah. That's a Copilot right there, right? Then you have conversational IVR bots that you can create in Copilot Studio. So customer calls a phone number and you get the IVR. It says, hi, how can I help you today, right? And then all of that can be built out in Copilot Studio. And so that's another Copilot, right? So that's all of that is just customer service, And then you can build your custom ones, et cetera. So I think that's the message, really. You just need to kind of figure out, okay, what's the use case? And then you narrow down that way. And then you find the best Copilot, the most applicable Copilot for the job. Yeah,
very good. I know it's a big area and it's continued to expand. And I always try to simplify any process. And for me, AI, I feel, is like electricity. If you use it wrong, it can kill you. And I'm not saying we're having that with AI at the moment, but it means different things to different people, right? Somebody creating an energy company, you're going to look at electricity quite differently than me switching on my coffee machine in the morning, which is still using electricity. And I wonder if there's a scenario that we get to where it's not about use cases or at all. It's just in everything, right? As in, we won't think about, is this using AI? We don't think about using electricity. When I switched my lights on this morning and turned my computer on, I didn't think about, I'm going to consume some electricity. And I think that we're fast heading to a state where we won't think about, are we using AI? It'll just be fully immersed in everything we do, in every product that we have.
Yeah.
But it needs clarity for customers because, I see this scenario happening where, any mid-market company to enterprise company will have 200 to 300 applications, and every one of those vendors are hard out stuffing AI into them. And so you imagine as the person working in that company, do I have to know which AI to interact with? Do I need to do it with that one over there because I have an HR question, so I've got to find the HR AI, or do I've got to understand my manufacturing pipeline, so, okay, what is that? Oh, is that SAP AI? Do I need to find the SAP? And that's why I think what Microsoft has come out with the UI for AI, and why I think Copilot should be the center of that, is because as a person, I shouldn't have to know where the data resides in my organization, which kind of vendor solution it is, but I don't want 300 AI applications to learn over the next couple of years. I just want one interface. I want to be able to prompt it, and that prompt will get a consistent response wherever the data resides. So I think Microsoft's made a good pivot with that. That only came out the week of that Vegas event, right? Satya announced it on the Monday of that but I think it has a lot of traction and could be built out well.
Yeah, definitely. And really, when you think about the Copilot service, AIs, Microsoft's made it really easy to point to different knowledge sources. So you can, really easily, so it's kind of consolidating information, right? That's really what you're kind of saying. The answer to something could be in 10 different systems, and you want that one Copilot to be able to get that answer from any or all systems, right?
Yeah. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have unique Copilots for a specific use case. More power to you. If you're in a contact center, you absolutely want the experience that's interacting with this customer online. But you should be able to jump into your normal Copilot and ask and access any data that is, I shouldn't have to know. So, I think both works. Any final words for us, Carl?
Final words? I don't think so, but it's been a real pleasure. I've been wanting to come onto this show for so long, and when I was an MVP, I kept telling, I think yourself or everybody, I got to go on Mark's show, and so I'm so happy to be here, But thank you. Yeah, we must do this again sometime.
Hey, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Mark Smith, otherwise known as the NZ365 guy. Is there a guest you would like to see on the show from Microsoft? Please message me on LinkedIn, and I'll see what I can do. Final question for you. How will you create with Copilot today? Ka kite.